Good evening, and thanks for joining us on Monday, October 24, 2016. Glendale Transportation and Parking Commission meeting is a regular meeting agenda. Let's start up with item number 1, roll call.
Item 1A is roll call. Chairperson Kirkjian.
Here.
Commissioner Gonzalez.
Here.
Commissioner Yakubian.
Here.
Commissioner Sahakian. Commissioner Batrasov.
Thank you. Let's move to item number 2.
Item number 2, 1B is flag salute. Chairperson Kirkjian.
Yes, that's true.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for one nation, liberty and justice.
Let's move to item number 2, posting of the agenda.
Item 2 is posting of the agenda. The agenda for the Monday, October 24th, 2016 regular meeting of the Glendale Transportation and Parking Commission was posted by Friday, October 21st, 2016 before 5 p.m. on the bulletin board outside of City Hall.
Thank you. Item number 3.
Item number 3 is approval of minutes for the August 22nd, 2016 regular meeting.
I actually just have a modification or an addition to the minutes under 6A in regard to the formation of the pedestrian task force. I think at some point there's no indication which commissioners were appointed to serve on the Pedestrian Safety Advisory Committee. So I would like it in the record that Commissioner Bartrasov and myself will be serving, representing the TPC on that.
Okay.
It does say that, though. Yeah.
Am I missing it?
Yes. 6A, the very last paragraph. Is Commissioner Gonzalez nominated Commissioner Mara Yakubian and Alec Bartrasov. Commissioner Sakian second the motion.
Oh, I apologize. I guess I have the wrong one. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm in error. Do you have that? There we go. Perfect. Got it. Thank you so much. I stand corrected.
Okay. Can I have a motion to approve?
I'll make the motion to approve.
Second.
Roll call?
Chairperson Kirkjian.
Yes.
Commissioner Gonzalez.
Yes.
Commissioner Yakubian.
Yes.
Commissioner Sahakian. Commissioner Batrasov.
Item number 4.
Item 4 is oral communication. Discussion is limited to not a part of this agenda. Each speaker is allowed 5 minutes. The commission may question the speaker, but there will be no debate or decision.
I have no cards, so let's go on to item number 5.
Item number 5 is information only. Status update concerning the South Glendale Community Plan and Environmental Impact Report, EIR.
Okay. Mr. Loomis.
Okay, are we live? There we go. So once again, my name is Alan Loomis, the Deputy Director for the Urban Design and Mobility section of the city's Community Development Department. And so one of the staff members leading the development of the city's South Glendale Community Plan. So we're here tonight to give you an informational update as to where we stand with the plan and what's being developed. You are not being asked tonight to take any action, although we welcome your comments and sort of suggestions as we begin to develop our project. So get the slides up. Turn it off. Okay, here we go. So the community plan is the city's general plan, principally geared towards land use development, although it's tightly integrated into transportation planning, parks planning, our housing strategy, and other citywide planning elements. Typically, communities would engage in their general plan update one element at a time, which is to say they would take on just doing the land use element, or they might just do the circulation element, they might just do the housing element, and they would do, each one of those disciplines would be attacked at a citywide basis, and then every 10 years or so they might get around to updating the general plan. A number of cities will sometimes combine those, so I think most notably Pasadena and Santa Monica have combined their land use and their circulation elements as one update. That's another strategy cities have taken on. In Glendale, we are taking on most of the kind of disciplinary elements of a general plan policy document all at once. However, we are approaching the city into 4 separate community plan areas. And they are very creatively labeled north, east, west, and south. And the North Glendale Community Plan was completed in 2011, into 2011, early 2012. And that covers really the neighborhoods that are north of Spar Heights and Montrose in the La Crescenta Valley. So at the time the North Glendale Community Plan was adopted, Council gave staff the authorization to begin working on the South Glendale Community Plan, which is defined as everything south of the 134 freeway, with the exception of a small little piece of the downtown specific plan that creeps north of the freeway and captures the high-rises associated with the downtown, like the Nestle building, the Whole Foods Avery Dennison building, and the 2 hotels. And so that's what you're seeing that will pop up there. So the South Glendale Community Plan encompasses really the urbanized heart of the city. And just for future reference, after we complete the South Glendale plan, which we hope to have finished and adopted by Council next summer, we'll move onwards with the West and East plans, which will be essentially everything in between the 134 freeway and Spar Heights and Montrose. The dividing line between East and West may end up being Brand Boulevard. We haven't decided or discerned that yet. And it's very possible we may take on doing the East and West plans together at the same time as opposed to separating them. So there's a number of facts that we could give you about South Glendale. You can sort of read them off here. It is principally a multifamily and very much renters, a neighborhood of renters in comparison with other parts of the city. And of course, it also includes the city's largest kind of economic development and kind of retail centers between the downtown itself, which is of course dominated by the 2 malls, and then the Brand Boulevard of cars, which of course is a major economic engine for the city, both in terms of sales tax, but ultimately in terms of quality jobs. Mechanic jobs increasingly are technology jobs, and they don't tend to get shipped overseas, whereas other jobs have that tendency to sort of move out of the region. We also, of course, includes the existing Larry's Area and Glendale Transportation Center at the very south end of the city, which I'm sure the commissioners are very familiar with. And very close to that, which is going to be important as we move on, very close to the transportation center is Glendale Memorial Hospital, which is another job center that has high-quality jobs and an expectation to continue to expand, of course, as our population, not just in Glendale, but everywhere, continues to age, and sort of people refer to the silver tsunami as the sort of baby boom generation will begin to move into retirement.
Excuse me, let me ask you a question about residents. 46% of the city resides in that district we just outlined.
Correct.
That encompasses the new or projected residents that will be moving into these new units?
This is going to encompass existing residents and our population projections as we move forward, as we look at different land use alternatives, would include projections for new development that might occur.
My question is 3,800 units that are being built, the residents of those units might be somewhere 8, 9, 10,000 people. Are they built in that 46%?
Generally, yes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And I will say, and this is in the staff report, there are 80,000 residential units in the city, across citywide, 80,000 residential units. And so when we kind of talk about the 3,000 or 4,000 units that's happened in the downtown or the kind of greater downtown area, I think it needs to be put in perspective that that's not even 0.5% of the entire city's kind of in terms of proportion of the residential units we have. And we're still trying to ascertain, working through various entities that do the lease-ups of those buildings, trying to get a kind of clearer picture of who's moving into those new apartment buildings downtown. Is it what we would anticipate, which is empty nesters and millennials that are either singles or couples and not necessarily with children? But a lot of those properties are still in a lease-up phase, and some of the larger ones have just opened, so they haven't had that many people moving at this point. So that's still an evolving number, I think, in terms of the population impact of those newer developments. But again, we're talking 3,000 to 4,000 units in a city that already has 80,000 residential units, including single-family homes.
Okay, thank you.
Alan, the red line that you had up there, is that the extent of the southern part of the city, or did you mention it and I missed it? Is that?
I did not mention it, but yes, that's the south of the 134 freeway. That's the southern boundaries of the city. So on the west side of the city, it's the railroad tracks, the San Fernando, the right of way that the Metrolink and Amtrak trains run on. For a good chunk of that area, that's also parallel to San Fernando Road, and then on the screen, San Fernando Road peels off of the railroad tracks around Pacific, where it intersects with Pacific Avenue. And then there's a couple blocks of kind of light industrial that's sandwiched between the tracks and the city limit and San Fernando Road. Then on the east side of the city, the city border kind of meanders a little bit, cuts across Forest Lawn Memorial Park. So Forest Lawn is actually half in the city of Glendale and half in the city of Los Angeles.
Oh, right through their property, huh?
Yeah. And then there's a kind of boundary line that's on the east edge of Adams Hill. There's not too many streets that cross. There's kind of a mini ridge line there, so there's not that many streets that cross from the Glendale side of Adams Hill over into the Los Angeles or Glass Hill Park side. And then eventually, as you can see, then there's a kind of east-west line that's more or less at Acacia that takes you up to the 2 freeway. And then for all practical purposes, the 2 freeway is the remaining portion of the east boundary. There are 2 kind of oddities in that. There is, as you can see, there is a tiny chunk of the city of Glendale that's on the Los Angeles side of the 2 freeway. And is only accessible from the city of Los Angeles. So whenever people have come forward with development propositions on that site, it's always like, well, you've got to talk to the city of LA, see if they'll let you have their sewer hookups and all that sort of stuff.
So that's not where the retail is at Colorado?
No.
South of that? Huh?
No, and then as you move forward, there's actually most of the retail on Colorado and East Colorado is within the city of Glendale, although there is a street, and I believe it's called Eagledale, which if you're traveling eastbound on Broadway or Wilson, and then you make the right turn to get onto the 2 freeway headed south into downtown, you go down this little street called Eagledale. That's actually in the city of Los Angeles. It's not Glendale, but essentially the 2 freeway is the eastern border of the city, at least south of the 134.
Thank you.
So I kind of gave a quick overview of the community plan in terms of it being the general plan, sort of constitutional kind of document that would sort of bring together the city's land use policies and other associated policies that are really impacted by land use or kind of ties it together with land use decisions. That's really the goal of the community plan. In South Glendale, one of the other major components that we've been looking at is really beginning to tie together previous planning efforts that have occurred in South Glendale. We did a good amount of research when we first started in this, digging through the archives and writing our own kind of summary policy papers, and discovered you could look in different parts of South Glendale have been planned in different fashions going well back into the 70s. And the kind of major milestone in the 70s is 1972, 73, 74 with the formation of the central redevelopment area that then led to the construction of the Galleria and the beginning of redevelopment work. Since that time, there's been a series of a number of different kind of planning efforts in South Glendale, each with their own kind of public outreach strategy and process and advisory committees in some cases. So South Glendale has really been planned pretty extensively over the past 40 years.
Was there actually an official redevelopment project area in South Glendale?
Yeah, there's two actually. So and strangely enough, they still exist, although the agency's ability to do anything is now non-existent. But the project areas as a kind of boundary line on the map still exist, and we still collect some tax increment out of them to fund certain projects. So there's the central project area, which is essentially the kind of core retail area of downtown. And then there's a project area along the commercial and industrial districts parallel to San Fernando Road.
I kind of labeled that work that the city did in the central business district with the Lemley and the Panda, I think, and everything as a pretty creative financial move relative to a residual project area. Is there any possibility in South Glendale for such a creative move for enhancement of that area or enhancement of that particular project area?
Not in that form, because Lemley, the Museum of Neon Art, and a few of those kind of and the Central Library renovation were really about sort of wrangling the last bit of money out of redevelopment as redevelopment was being wound down, and that was sort of various litigation and kind of maneuvering up in Sacramento to ensure that we could get that last bit of money for those particular projects.
And that doesn't potentially exist for South Glendale in those project areas?
No, there's no. The redevelopment as a tool as a kind of financing tool is gone. The state is beginning to look at other options, and we've been pretty creative about thinking about other options ourselves within the boundary of what's allowed by the state. To sort of pursue other opportunities, but it's significantly limited compared to redevelopment.
I was asking the question because of the large percentage you had up there for transit, being transit users, and was seeking a spot to where there might be an enhancement, especially since the state is now looking at, I believe, new dollars and mini redevelopment at transit centers.
Yeah, and I think as the presentation moves on, we'll kind of touch upon how we think transportation money becomes a major component of this. So as I said, there's really a significant number of planning efforts, and some of them are fairly large. The largest and most kind of comprehensive was the 1996 Greater Downtown Strategic Plan, which covers almost all of what we're now defining as the South Glendale Community Plan. And that particular plan led to a number of different things, including ultimately the implementation of the town center, what now is now known as the Americana brand, and then ultimately as well the downtown specific plan. But outside of the downtown, it also launched what's called the Model Neighborhood Initiative or something along those lines that was focused on Pacific Edison. So the construction of Pacific Edison as a joint use library and school facility and kind of community park is a kind of outgrowth of that major planning effort in the early 90s. So we had produced, when we gave this information to the City Council back in July, we actually gave them a whole policy document where we'd summarized every one of these planning efforts in one page, plus a map that illustrated whether it was a large, expansive plan or whether it was focused in one kind of very small neighborhood. And in some cases, for just a few blocks, there's been a lot of planning effort attended to Adams Square Retail District, for example, which is barely a block long, for example. So that information was all online. And I will say the staff report that you received is, for all practical purposes, the staff report we gave to the City Council at the end of August, at the conclusion of 3 planning workshops that we had with the City Council in July. There were 3 consecutive weeks, and the first 2 were conducted in the afternoon. They were intended to be sort of like the Work Boot Tuesday study sessions, a kind of conversation between staff and the council. And then based on community desires and interest, the 3rd workshop got moved to an evening council meeting. And so after those 3 workshops and the information we'd heard from the council relative to what they thought might be some of the issues in South Glendale, we came back to them in August with a summary and then ultimately suggested 3 different alternatives that we would evaluate for an EIR. So your staff report you're seeing is verbatim, with the exception of the very last page that outlines the authority of the different commissions, is essentially the same staff report the council received in August. And for the most part, you're seeing the same information they saw. And this information was also presented in this same forum to the Planning Commission last Wednesday, and a slightly different forum we'll be presenting to Design Review Board this coming week, Thursday. So the kind of core element of our community plan strategy in terms of thinking about how we manage growth or think about the degree of change is these 4 categories: conserve, maintain, enhance, transform. And so you'll see on the various maps that we've produced, they're colored, the different neighborhoods are colored either yellow, orange, or red, or pink, depending on how it shows up here in the projector. When we look at the North Glendale plan, we see lots of land in the olive green or conserve. That's really was intended from a policy statement to be kind of wilderness open space that's in the mountains. So when we first looked at our maps of South Glendale, we didn't see any land that sort of matched that kind of category. Although in some conversations we've been having with the Adams Hill neighborhood, we think that we might have overlooked a few random parcels that we'll have to revisit the map. But by and large, our thinking about development is maintain, enhance, or transform. Maintain is more or less what you would think it to be. It is existing zoning and existing policies carried forward into the future, which is generally almost entirely existing residential neighborhoods, single-family and multifamily neighborhoods. That does not mean those neighborhoods are completely frozen in time. The existing zoning code does allow for development. There are development opportunities and underdeveloped parcels in those neighborhoods, and so you would expect to see some modest degree of change, somewhere in the order of about 1% of kind of land area might turn over in a particular neighborhood in a given year. Really, one parcel turning over to a new project. Enhance takes that a little bit further. This may be applied more directly towards some of the multifamily neighborhoods where we think we might want to target a little bit more investment and help, and then also some of the commercial districts throughout the city. And then finally, transform is obviously it sort of suggests what it is, which is that we would imagine that in 20 years this neighborhood might look pretty substantively different than it does today. So the kind of role model, if you will, of a transformed neighborhood, at least at the kind of extreme outside of transform, would be the downtown area. And we've actually keyed these descriptions and this kind of percentage of growth to our analysis in our general plan, which has been, or in our environmental impact report as we begin to develop that. So it's kind of an interesting kind of way of approaching it, I think. So what we've done in the South Glendale plan is we've actually looked at existing plans. As I said, we were looking at existing plans, existing policies, and historic subdivision maps. And we've divided the South Glendale area into somewhere in the vicinity of 30 separate neighborhoods and commercial districts. So each one of these different districts or neighborhoods we've described in this fashion. So you can see there's some representative photographs and then a detailed map of the neighborhood. And what you're seeing on the map as a kind of reference point is the big arrows or kind of bold lines are indicating the major vehicle thoroughfares or transit corridors, and then the dashed dot green lines is bike routes as defined under the adopted bike master plan. We've also then been able to calculate the degree, the amount of development in these particular neighborhoods, the sort of overall acreage, how many residential units are in there, how many are single family, how many are apartments, how many are condos in the multifamily, how much square footage of commercial areas in these neighborhoods or districts, and then extrapolating from that also the kind of, a guesstimate of what the current population is of those different areas. So a substantive part of our work over the past year has been actually collating all sorts of data sources to be able to develop a pretty detailed land use picture of the city at a parcel level. And this feeds into the traffic model. The traffic model, in order to run its calculations, asks, how many thousands of square feet of a particular kind of land use, whether it's restaurant or medical office, is located on a particular parcel. So we now have a pretty good grasp of all that data. It took about a year to really kind of put that picture together, but it's really critical to our kind of being able to analyze from a statistical standpoint what's happening in South Glendale both today and then moving forward with any kind of proposed land use changes. So really what's kind of at the heart of the South Glendale Community Plan is the transit center, the Larry Zarian Transit Center at the south end of the city in the neighborhood called Tropico. A big portion of our efforts in South Glendale is actually funded by a transit-oriented development grant from Metro, the County Transit Authority. And so a lot of the sort of real thoughtful efforts, the major focus has been in the transit district in Tropico. So this is one of the posters we produced to sort of indicate some of what the policy suggestions might come in the community plan relative to Tropico, what they might say. There are two things here. One is, well, this is also somewhat reflective of a significant amount of public outreach we did in the Tropico district about 2 years ago. I hosted a number of kind of workshops and meetings in the Tropico neighborhood by the train station, and had a lot of different community activities. There was a strong desire to see more green space and kind of pedestrian-friendly streets and greenways, et cetera, in this neighborhood. So you can see that reflected in the green arrows in the map and some of the statements like Cerritos Linear Park or Design Streets. Another major component behind this that's also a kind of pretty significant driver for rethinking the zoning and land use situation down here is the hospital. The hospital will need to expand, starting with some pretty substantive reconstruction of the hospital that's actually dictated by state law. Every hospital is to bring their facilities up to a kind of new standard for earthquake and life safety. And in the case of many hospitals, it means they have to tear down their existing patient tower and completely reconstruct it. So we've had a number of conversations with Glendale Memorial Hospital as to kind of how their expansion plans relative to this complying with the state law, kind of what that means for them. But then we're also building into this plan an opportunity for ancillary medical office and kind of research labs that would be associated with the hospital to ensure that the zoning would be accommodating to those kinds of uses. Again, hoping to bring kind of high quality jobs into this area, which makes sense because it's right next to the train station, as well as a number of very significant bus lines. So that Tropico plan is constant in all the alternatives that I'll show you. So as I said, we had developed and presented to the City Council 3 alternatives, and these are the 3 alternatives that we're currently analyzing and number crunching for the environmental impact report. We have to do as part of this process, we do have to have an environmental impact report. It is a program level environmental impact report. It's a little bit different than, say, a project level impact report. Project level impact report would be geared towards approving a particular building or development. And so in that scenario, the alternatives that you would have analyzed under an environmental impact report is the project is proposed by the developer and then typically 2 or 3 other projects that have lesser intensity. It's similar here, except that we're not approving any specific project. We're looking at a zoning envelope that has a particular kind of development capacity. And the horizon of this environmental impact report is 25 years, starting from last year, because that's when our baseline data and the land use model begins, is 2015. So starting this year, we're 24 years out in terms of our planning horizon and analysis. So we have to look at 3 different alternatives, and technically there's 4 alternatives. There's a no project alternative, which in the case of a policy document geared towards land use and zoning is essentially everything as it exists today. Existing zoning doesn't change. There's no new mitigation fees. There's no new transportation infrastructure. It is simply life as we see it today out in city streets. So we have to look at that, but then we also have to look at 3 project alternatives, and per CEQA, there is a project that's called the project, which has to be the most intense. It has to generate the most impact. So you'll see alternatives of 1, 2, and 3 kind of building on one end to another, and alternative 3 is kind of the most impactful in terms of development. So this scenario that you're looking at here on the screen, this is alternative 1. Which would be the least impactful in that sort of lineup of projects. And you can see the yellow, orange, red, or pink kind of coloring kind of playing out here. So the red is, again, indicating neighborhoods that would be where our policies and kind of zoning strategy would indicate a kind of transformation, which is somewhere between 10 to 20% change of or redevelopment of land. And what really sort of structures this is that black line that kind of does the L shape through the city. This is the route of the existing 780, 180, 181 bus corridor running through the city. So the 780, 180 combo feeds east into Pasadena and then leaves the city on Los Feliz, headed into Hollywood and points west. It's a very popular bus line, and when you look at a map of our kind of major transit nodes and kind of transit usage, this line really kind of corridor really stands out. So in some ways, this alternative is really built around transit in the city as we have it today.
Excuse me, you're talking about east-west there?
Yeah, it runs east-west on Broadway. So it comes in from Pasadena off Colorado through Eagle Rock and then turns on to Broadway and Glendale. There's a stop right out here in front of City Hall, and then turns south and central right around the Galleria, heads south on Central until it reaches Los Feliz, and then heads west out of the city via Atwater as it heads towards Hollywood. And of course, it's
and the
eastbound buses running in the other direction.
North-South Street is Brand or?
Central.
Central.
Yeah, there's a lot of transit service on Central. In fact, when you look at Metro's kind of 5-minute service map, or maybe it's a 10-minute service map, it's their map where they say, we have so much service is so frequent on these corridors or these lines that you don't need a schedule. You'll find a bus coming by in the next 10 minutes. Central, this is the corridor they map in Glendale.
How would this relate to that latest announcement we heard about the planning and program?
You are anticipating the next sequence of slides.
Sorry. Oh, wait.
So in this sequence, the Tropico district is that south end. The star represents the existing transit center. And then at the north, you can see the downtown. And then because there's all this transit service running on Central, we think we ought to sort of connect that, as if you will, as a kind of barbell of kind of two poles connected by Central as a transit corridor. And then most of the residential neighborhoods and some of the commercial districts, such as North Glendale Avenue, would be a maintained policy. And then there is limited enhancement development focus into a few kind of key neighborhood commercial areas like Adams Square, North Verdugo Road, Pacific Edison Center, and then of course the Brand Boulevard of Cars. We know the dealerships will always need to sort of expand or kind of rebuild in some fashion to stay competitive. So this plan is really, this alternative is based, as I said, on existing transit resources. So we've developed in each of these alternatives, and this is information we developed since the council meeting, these kind of cartoon sketches and to sort of indicate what some of the policy ideas might be in each one of the different alternatives. And in some cases, they represent different transformations or enhancements to particular neighborhoods or neighborhood districts, commercial districts. And so this is information that we've been sharing as we go into community meetings since September and October.
In other words, the objective here is to transform Tropico from industrial stock to residential stock of properties.
Not necessarily.
And medically for also medical use or commercial use that has to do with medical and high-end jobs and so forth.
Yes and no. So what we are thinking or kind of are trying to craft in terms of zoning regulations relative to Tropico is that we would really develop a number of a kind of even playing field in terms of trying to incentivize whether it's multifamily housing or medical office or the hospital or maintaining the industrial base that's there now. So we think it's a little bit let's say arrogant in a way to try and anticipate what that neighborhood really should be. There is existing industrial uses there that are doing fine, and we don't necessarily want to push them out because they do represent jobs and different kinds of economic activities. But we do want to incentivize the hospital and medical services to move into that district and take advantage of being adjacent to the hospital. And we know that there's existing pressure or desire to put multifamily mixed-use development in that area, and we anticipate that the state will continue to build in new incentives for multifamily housing or affordable housing to move next to transit. So our zoning strategy and land use strategy is not to prioritize any of those 4 different uses, but to really sort of make it make all of them desirable, and then sort of figure that the market will decide what's the best thing to do in that neighborhood.
Relative to the potential funding of what I think is called mini redevelopments or something, project areas, which you made reference to with state funding, is that just for light rail or can it also be for buses?
Well, what the state has instituted in lieu of redevelopment is a couple of different things that are similar to redevelopment. There's something called enhanced infrastructure financing districts, right, which would be similar to redevelopment, where you would draw a kind of boundary around a number of parcels, and then you would have to put it up to a vote of those parcels. They would have to elect to tax themselves an additional property tax for the purposes of building or maintaining some sort of additional infrastructure.
Okay, like a form of tax increment funding, but
exactly
a little bit different.
Yeah.
But that normally would take place at an intersection, I would assume, maybe where. Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. I mean, I know, for example, because Laura Stotler, who's the other principal planner, is working on this, is very familiar with Santa Clarita. She used to work there. There's a lot of kind of an infrastructure financing districts or assessment districts in Santa Clarita to maintain the bike lane, bike routes, et cetera, that run through neighborhoods. And so those tend to be built into the neighborhoods as Lennar Homes or whoever, the Newhall Ranch Company, is building those neighborhoods. They just do the tax increment infrastructure financing district while they're plotting out the neighborhood, and then when they sell the property, it's just kind of comes with the land. You have to pay into this. It's certainly a lot more difficult to sort of impose this or kind of promote it in neighborhoods that are completely built out. People are already paying taxes, but it is a tool that's kind of there in lieu of redevelopment.
Thank you.
So this is Alternative 2. Alternative 2 anticipates the North Hollywood-Pasadena bus rapid transit corridor that Metro is currently planning. So we've been engaged in a number of kind of discussions with Metro as they've been planning a bus rapid transit corridor that would connect the North Hollywood Orange Line Red Line station to the Del Mar Gold Line station in Pasadena. It's part of Metro's new bus rapid transit corridor study, so they're also studying Vermont Avenue, the whole kind of pretty much the whole corridor of Vermont Avenue, and they kind of running from Koreatown up to Los Feliz and down to USC. And then the other corridor they're looking at is this one connecting Burbank, Glendale, and Pasadena. So what they are looking at in terms of their alignment is it comes down Colorado through Eagle Rock from Pasadena, so it's running parallel, the same street as the 780 route. And currently Metro is thinking it would continue on Broadway, then run north on Brand to Glen Oaks, and then head east on Glen Oaks, then kind of southwest on Olive Street in Burbank, and to reach the media center area, and then kind of back onto Lankershim to get up to North Hollywood. That's the current route they're looking at. We are proposing in the South Glendale plan that we have Metro actually run that on East Colorado rather than East Broadway, and then run north on Central instead of Brand. We think it doesn't make sense for them to basically duplicate high-quality transit service on Broadway they already have. There's actually not that much transit service on East Colorado, so bringing a new high-quality transit corridor, bus corridor onto East Colorado would definitely enhance mobility for neighborhoods south of Colorado. And then makes a certain amount of sense to think of Central as being a bus corridor where there's already a major bus corridor headed south, and why not extend that north? The other thinking on this is that Metro has indicated to really make this bus corridor work, they'd really like to have dedicated lanes for their buses. And we've said that that's probably going to be pretty difficult to accomplish on Brand if you have to take away the diagonal parking on the street. So we're promoting the idea that this bus corridor would run on East Colorado and then north on Central, and then continue going west on Glen Oaks. So that's why you see then East Colorado being colored in red, because it's following that route. And then we've also would sort of double down, if you will, onto that bus corridor. So the commercial portion of East Broadway, which is really from Glendale Avenue about over to Verdugo, would also be colored red as a kind of transformation. Metro has indicated that should Measure M pass in 2 weeks, they would begin construction of this bus corridor in Shay, you've been involved in this, 2020 with service in 2022, I believe. Shay and I are looking at each other skeptically because we think that's an overly ambitious goal, but that's what Metro's indicated. So this is, if Measure M passes, is a pretty eminent transit.
That's for a bus line?
Bus rapid transit, yeah.
Bus rapid transit.
So I think what Metro would prefer to do, and the way they've kind of imagined this thus far, is that it's similar to the Orange Line running across the San Fernando Valley, which is to say it's running in dedicated lanes that are bus only.
Near LA Valley College.
Correct. Metro, I think, recognizes that they're trying to run on existing city streets and that they may not be able to get dedicated bus lanes on every street they'd like to run on. So that's ultimately going to be kind of a situation they'll have to address if they move forward with this analysis, this study, should Measure M pass. But this is, in the scheme of Measure M's major transit corridors and transit investments, this is the major one that comes to Glendale, is this corridor. And as I said, Metro's indicated they'd start building this in 2020. So we think that we should begin, if it passes, we begin planning for that corridor to come through the city and think about how that enhances land use and development. You can sort of make it out parallel to Central and Colorado and Broadway on the map. It's a little hard to see on this projection. There is an area about a block off of each of those major commercial corridors that's hatched between, in a kind of candy cane fashion, between orange and yellow. That is something we are calling an affordable housing overlay zone. So we think that if these major...
Orange and where? I'm sorry? Orange on what street?
It's hatched in the map between orange and yellow. But it's a block off of South Central, East Colorado, and East Broadway.
To the east of that.
Oh,
Yeah, so for example, on South Central, which is a major existing bus corridor, we're talking about the existing multifamily properties that would be between Central and Columbus. And then it's essentially everything between East Colorado and East Broadway, and then running a block north of East Broadway and a block south of East Colorado. So the idea here is that given that we'll have these sort of major transit corridors, that if there's a place where we would begin to sort of focus investment in affordable housing, that makes a certain amount of sense, that encourage affordable housing to cluster within walking distance of these bus corridors.
Why not put those in Tropico near the train station?
Well, the red districts already take care of that. So we are looking at in the existing multifamily zones as opposed to commercial zones. In the existing multifamily zones, we think we need to have a much more nuanced and sort of subtle strategy that may not be simply zoning. The bluntest way of doing this would basically to upzone all those properties. So if they're currently zoned for 20 units an acre, upzone them to be 30 units an acre. That would be the bluntest way of doing it, but that could have some pretty significant impacts in the quality of character of those neighborhoods. So there are other tools we could look at. For example, we might slightly modify the existing incentives the zoning code has to deliver affordable housing. We might increase those incentives, maybe add a new incentive that would only apply to those particular neighborhoods that are near those bus corridors. It might also be the place where ultimately the city's housing authority begins to really focus new projects. When this housing authority is the investor or sponsor of new affordable housing development, they may begin to decide to focus there. It's a concept that we would have proposed to council, really needs a lot of additional study and kind of evaluation of what the appropriate package of tools are. And so zoning to implement this wouldn't come with the community plan, but might take a number of years to develop through the Planning Commission, the Housing Authority, the Council, to figure out what the right package of strategies is in those areas.
Is that the only place where it's contemplated for an overlay for affordable housing in the whole city?
At least, well, in South Glendale, since that's the area, that's the area we're focused on now. Yeah.
No, I appreciate that, but the question I'm asking is it the only area in the city as a whole that there will be potentially an overlay zone for affordable housing?
If we develop a concept that is portable to other parts of the city, we may look at doing that in the east and west community plans, or perhaps even in the north community plan if we kind of get into a cycle of eventually revisiting the north community. plan.
The current North Community Plan doesn't have that, I take it.
No, this is a concept that's been uniquely developed relative to the South Glendale Community Plan. And I should say, this actually emerges out of a kind of a conversation that the City Council, acting as the Housing Authority, had about housing affordability, in which they had evaluated or looked at about 8 different strategies for promoting housing affordability across the city. One of those was to do some sort of affordable housing overlay zone or targeted affordable housing neighborhoods. So it's kind of emerging out of that conversation, which was also happening in July. Other ideas that came out of that workshop included, potentially doing a bond to promote and fund affordable housing, inclusionary housing fees. There was a number of different strategies that the housing staff and the housing authority discussed, but in terms of land use strategy, this is kind of the one that makes sense to kind of put on the map.
Let me say something. In terms of product, what we created is a new product, is all these new apartments, high-tech buildings, and small 600 square feet units, which is catering to basically millennials and singles or very seniors who want to live downtown. Talking about affordable housing, talking about different type of audience that maybe women would bring into the city. What about small lot divisions, subdivisions, to keep and maintain our future generation, for example, not to leave Glendale and make it affordable? Why not look at a situation like that?
Absolutely. That's part of the plan, and it's not really touched on in here, but there are a number of strategies that we have put forward that we would evaluate and potentially adopt ultimately relative to existing multifamily neighborhoods and trying to improve quality of life in those neighborhoods. So small lot subdivisions, which is a tool that's been employed in the city of Los Angeles, is on the table for the South Glendale plan. And so that may very well be one of the first action items of the South Glendale plan, is to get on the books a small lot subdivision ordinance. We've actually drafted that ordinance. We've drafted guidelines. We've been working on it for a number of years. It's just been kind of sitting on the shelf until it sort of plugs into the community plan at the right time. That would probably go, I would say, also with a kind of update of our condo conversion ordinance. We have to do some work on that front to stay compliant with state law relative to subdivision codes. And so small lot subdivision condo conversions are sort of tied to that issue. We have to address that issue anyways, as I said, to be compliant with state law. So that may come by the end of 2017 would be my guess.
The reason as a product, that's a preferred product from this commission standpoint of view, at least as far as I'm concerned, is we don't create a parking problem for ourselves. If by new ordinance, if every unit has their own parking spaces without giving any exceptions to those units that are being built, versus low-income housing where they get all sorts of parking credits and so forth, and we don't get parking shortages downtown, and we have people come over here and they're crying their heart out in terms of parking permits and don't park on this side or don't park on that side and so forth, as you're aware. And by that kind of product, we can service City of Glendale, and by providing them new product, and I'm sure a working family of 2 can afford something like that.
Yeah, as I said, small lot subdivisions is drafted and ready to move forward and would probably follow the community plan adoption pretty quickly. But your question, or the issue you raised relative to affordable housing, kind of automatically getting a number of parking breaks, is one reason we think it makes sense to begin to focus affordable housing in terms of whatever sort of incentive we can build into the zoning code and other tools, why that should be focused within a very short walking distance of these major bus corridors. In theory, you're getting those breaks because you're using the transit resources. If those affordable units are a quarter mile or a half mile or more away from the major bus corridors, people may not choose to use the transit. They may still choose to drive. So that's kind of one of the logics of focusing the affordable housing overlay zone within a block of these major bus corridors. So if I may move on to alternative 3, which is actually the project from a CEQA perspective, and therefore is the plan we are developing. Alternatives 1 and 2 are really really just alternatives we have to look at from an environmental perspective. Although I should say alternative 2 includes everything I described in alternative 1, including small lot development and a number of other incentives focused into the multifamily neighborhoods. Alternative 3, therefore, includes everything I showed you in alternative 1 plus everything I showed you in alternative 2, and then layers onto that some additional infrastructure. So this one will probably be pretty exciting to the Commission, I think. So this maintains the dark black line maintains the 780, 180 corridor on Broadway and Central headed out to Hollywood, maintains on East Colorado and Central headed out on Glen Oaks the bus rapid transit corridor I just described, but overlays onto this 3 new rail corridors. So starting with the most likely on the west edge of the city in blue is the existing Metrolink line, and that is the study Commissioner Gonzalez referenced. So Metro is agreed to look at options for increasing service, both in terms of time and frequency along the Metrolink corridor, and potentially include some additional stops on that corridor. So that's pretty fantastic news for Glendale because that's existing rail service we have. And as you know, the existing Larry's Area Transit Center is close to a mile away from the downtown. And so you kind of have this last mile, first mile problem. And it's at the very south end of the city. It doesn't really serve Atwater because of the way the train is located and so on and so forth. So we're proposing that as part of that study, we look at getting another station in the kind of mid-city area, which would probably be...
What area, potentially?
Well, I'm calling it mid-city, but it's around Pacific Edison Center, so probably around Colorado. We're selecting... So that's that second star as you move north on the blue line. We're selecting that in large measure because from the tracks to downtown West Colorado is really the shortest walk. It's the closest point that the existing train line comes to the kind of business core, retail core of the downtown. And there's already been multifamily development on West Colorado, and there's this great community asset in Pacific Edison Park. So we think that's probably a logical location somewhere in that area for another stop on the Metrolink line. We'd also propose another stop outside of the South Glendale Community Plan at Grandview, or in that general area, which would service the Disney and DreamWorks Creative Campus.
And those are the other stars, or further north?
That one would be the Grandview stop is off this map.
Yeah.
But
Now, you're looking for an additional, so just one additional stop that...
We'd hope to get both.
Yeah.
We're pushing for both.
Okay.
There might then also be an additional stop between the Larry's Area Transit Center and Union Station, maybe in Glassell Park. They might look at doing something like that.
This one would... I'm sorry, go ahead.
The impetus behind this is ultimately high-speed rail, because the High-Speed Rail Authority is looking at the same corridor. And so what they've indicated to us, the High-Speed Rail Authority, is they would add 2 additional tracks in that right-of-way to accommodate high-speed rail trains plus the Metrolink. So it'd be a total of 4 tracks in that corridor. And once high-speed rail, if and when high-speed rail begins running in that corridor, there will have a station up in the Antelope Valley, I believe at Palmdale or Lancaster, one at Burbank Airport, and then the last one terminating at Union Station. We have had many conversations with high-speed rail about, why not Glendale, and the way the statute, the legislation that enables high-speed rail is structured, that's not on the table. So we've said, well, if you're going to do that long-haul service, Metrolink doesn't need to do long-haul service out of the Antelope Valley. So if you live in the Antelope Valley, you're probably not going to get on a Metrolink train. That'll take you 2 hours to get to downtown Union Station, when you could get on a high-speed train that could take you 20 or 30 minutes. So therefore, Metrolink could start to look much more like a light rail service. And so that's the conversation we've been having with Metro that led to the study that was recently announced that they're going to begin engaging in.
Now, at those stops, how are people going to cross the street? Are there going to be overpasses built or underpasses, or because
yet to be determined? Yeah, yet to be determined.
But that will create a lot of pedestrian traffic too. And San Fernando Road is rather wide. It's probably 100, 120 feet wide in certain places.
Yeah, yet to be determined what those stations would look like and kind of how you would access them. I mean, one thing we do know is that high-speed rail, when they do begin construction, they will be looking at a lot of the at-grade crossings. They'd like to close all of them and replace them with overpasses or underpasses or just eliminate them altogether. So that's been an ongoing conversation between Metro, High-Speed Rail Authority, Metrolink, and the city as to what that looks like. And I would say every meeting we have, they come back with a new proposal. So I wouldn't want to sort of say what's being proposed at this point relative to that.
A couple of questions for clarification. First of all, the good news email that Rubeck sent out, I commend the staff and thank all those who've been working. I think he made some reference to negotiations, so I'm assuming that some of the negotiations at the table came from the city, and I appreciate the efforts to get to that point. The email also made reference that it was a committee of Metro. From what I'm hearing you say, Alan, it sounds like the committee's made its recommendation to the board and the board has approved it? Because it sounded like it has to still goes to the board.
The public hearing that was heard at Metro was in front of the Planning and Programming Committee, which is a subcommittee of the full Metro board. So they approved moving forward with this study, and then I believe at the next full board meeting is when that would be voted upon.
It'll be likely passed, do you think?
Typically, yeah.
Typically passed.
Yeah, typically recommendations out of the Metro's board subcommittees.
And then
board at the board level.
Further on his email, he makes reference to stations. So that's what you're talking about now is the possibility of one potentially here in South Glendale.
Correct, yeah. And for the sake of this map, we've drawn it at more or less in Colorado.
But given the numbers you showed at the beginning, it seems like if we, two would be good, like further north as has been stated. But this, unless you know the percentage of the transit users which would be West Glendale, this one seems to be more appropriate. If we only use transit users as a
right. Well, what we do know is there is a good amount of transit users going to the Disney DreamWorks campus. They typically are coming from points north, and they get off at the Burbank station and then ride a shuttle bus to get to the campus. So
I see.
Did a station in Grandview. We'd eliminate a bus on the city streets, and they could just walk to work.
So this one, however, would be, I guess, more oriented to citizens within the city of Glendale, because the other ones are maybe from. I mean, it's all good in the real sense, but
right.
This one also seems to be aligned with a potential east-west line.
Correct.
But rolling stock.
Correct. So what's also shown on this map is running down the 134 freeway corridor is a red line, is illustrated here on the map with 3 additional stations. So in the Measure M expenditure plan, if the North Hollywood Pasadena Bus Rapid Transit Corridor proves to be successful and ridership is there, they would eventually get around to augmenting that or replacing it with a light rail service.
Oh, I see. So that's decades.
Yeah, and the expenditure plan shows 2067, something like that.
Oh, it's a half a century.
Shay and I will be long retired probably by then.
So when you said station...
Beyond 2067, Shay, correct me.
When you said stations relative to where that red line is drawn currently...
Correct, yeah. So the red line is a little bit confusing because probably what it would be is an extension of the Gold Line light rail in Pasadena. Gotcha. A branch that would come off in Pasadena and head... west. And so we've drawn that down the center line of the freeway. We've actually looked at a couple different alignments, and we think that might make the most sense for a light rail service. And the conversations I've had with Metro staff relative to corridors or kind of alignments for the bus rapid transit corridor they're actively planning right now, I've asked them, as we make decisions about this bus corridor, do I have to be thinking in my mind that this same corridor eventually gets converted into light rail? And their answer is no. If we get around to doing light rail, we will be looking at a whole new alignment study that will be specific to the unique geometries and construction and corridors, et cetera, of light rail service as opposed to bus service. So for the sake of argument here, we're saying that that would run down the center line of the freeway with 3 potential stations in Glendale, one at Pacific, then another one at Brand, and then the third one would be at Verdugo Road. Verdugo Road actually would service Adventist Hospital, which is kind of why it's located there, although Adventist Hospital is just north of the freeway and outside of this particular planning area.
The ones that are the stars that are shown at on the Metrolink line, the reason you're showing a star currently at the station is that would be the additional rail that would be in for light rail or additional metro? I'm a little bit, Metrolink, I'm confused as to what that would, I can see the star up further north, and I take it that's a potentially brand new station.
Correct. Yeah.
Is that what the rails that are there now, or were adjacent parallel rails? And if so, the other star already has a stop there. Why would there be another stop?
Well, the only station that currently exists is the one at the very bottom of the map.
At the station?
Yeah,
right.
That's the existing Larry Zarian Glendale Metrolink.
So that would
Amtrak
not be a
station.
new station, that's an
Correct.
existing station?
That's an existing station.
Okay.
And then as you move north on that Metrolink
Right.
corridor line, there would be, we're mapping another station at Pacific Edison Center, Colorado.
And that would be used primarily as a Metrolink line, not a...
Correct. That would be Metrolink service, but with more frequent service.
More frequent service.
And not only in terms of number of trains going by in a particular hour, but also over the course of the day.
So earlier you made the comment that there's a possibility of studying the west and the east community areas in Glendale after this one is completed, apparently, and you've already... North has been done already, North Community. Where's the thinking of making a connection then north-south to get to, let's say, the projected star that lines up with Colorado or down to the station?
That is the third rail system on this map. So it shows up as an olive green line,
I
if you
see
can make
that
it out.
right there, very lightly.
And that is a reinstatement of the streetcar line that used to run on Brand Boulevard.
On Brand, all the way up to the northern Glendale.
Yeah, what we are showing right now is we're showing that running on Brand Boulevard, although we recognize that there's a very significant dialogue that would have to be had with the car dealers. But given that Brand Boulevard historically had a streetcar running down the median, the street is designed to accommodate that. We're showing a streetcar returning to Brand Boulevard, connecting the existing train station north up Brand through the downtown, past the two malls, through the downtown, across the 134 freeway, and then also heading west towards Burbank on Glen Oaks.
So I know that others in this room know I'm a broken record relative to this, but as much as the east-west rolling stock is helpful and good, the future of any connection throughout the county and the system has to come from northern Glendale, I believe, and the east and west portions. The population having to get down to downtown LA and connect to other stations. So I think that study is really important. When you say streetcar, does that imply maybe a local kind of... It was
Yes.
a key word I heard.
Yeah, no, it would be a streetcar in the sense that if you've been to Portland,
Yes,
Oregon,
I have.
you've probably
There's a
seen
great system
streetcars.
there. Great system.
And Portland on downtown streets that both their regional light rail and local streetcar. So it's more of a streetcar. So the thinking behind this is that Measure M includes some specific line item for visionary streetcar projects. It also includes a line item for the downtown LA streetcar.
You're talking about this current one you just
The Measure M ordinance that'll be on the
Oh, the
ballot.
Measure M ordinance, I see.
When you look through the list of all the
I
projects,
didn't know there was a streetcar ingredient there.
Yeah, when you look through all the ingredients that they would fund, there is a downtown LA streetcar, and then there's another line item that just says seating, streetcar projects.
I see.
So we think we might be able to access that particular line item of funding to begin to build a local streetcar. That would then be probably locally run and operated, and we think going westward, the logical terminus of that streetcar headed out on Glen Oaks would be not downtown Burbank, although it would service downtown Burbank. It would actually be Burbank Airport and the future high-speed rail station in Burbank. So that might be a joint operation with the city of Burbank at some point in the future.
Well,
so
that's really good news.
That would be the alignment that we'd be hoping to build. Now, the thinking on that has been it might make sense to do a local streetcar because it's serving that kind of local connection between the two downtowns and the neighborhoods of Northwest Glendale and Burbank to the airports. So it's really sort of making that last mile, first mile connection between Glendale, Burbank neighborhoods to the regional transit being built by other agencies. So it's kind of more of a local service. The other discussion we've had relative to Metro maybe doing that as a light rail is knowing the experience they've had in Santa Monica and other places. Once Metro commits to doing a light rail, you really have to take Metro stuff the way they give it. And so there's a lot of loss of local control in terms of design characteristics.
That's a very good point, yeah.
And so to imagine Metro pushing their light rail trains down the center of Brand Boulevard with no regard to the design character and kind of aesthetic of Brand Boulevard, it's kind of frightening.
And you mentioned Portland. I mean, their system is so easily accessible. It's grade level. There are no big, huge platforms. And it's just really beautiful.
So the flip side of that is that if we were to take on building and operating a streetcar on our own, it means we have to figure out how we ultimately pay for
I appreciate that.
Building it and then running it is probably the more significant kind of cost. So that gets to the question you asked about other enhanced infrastructure financing.
That's where I was going
might
with
become
that.
a tool to implement such a streetcar.
If the state would see that as a possibility, then there may be some funding through that mechanism.
And a lot of the streetcar projects around the country have been funded by federal New Starts money. So,
I think we all know if we look at a map, Metro and Metrolink and light rail and even bus, except for this recent east-west connection that we're going to be getting, we know that there's good ridership there. This whole area is an island. I mean, we don't have that connection that we really need. I think for in time, younger people are going to have the cars that we have today. I mean, it's just changing. You can see it already in downtown Los Angeles. I mean, the amount of bicycles that are being used down there now, once they get off transit, it's incredible. And we need this connection to Glendale, I think, to get to the whole system throughout, to get to the goal line, to get to all of them, and going east and then having to go south when you can go right directly down, right where you should be, like it was when we had the red line, the red electric lines.
Right.
So I'm really pleased to hear about the streetcar ingredient. It's a kind of, I was not aware that that's in there. That sounds like something we should be thinking about. I don't know what other commissioners think regarding the possibility that should that initiative pass in a couple of weeks, we ought to be looking at this.
Yeah, absolutely. So this plan, this is the plan for now, pending kind of further review. What we're beginning to evaluate with the environmental impact report, so we're crunching numbers in terms of what this particular map would look like relative to development potential. We don't know that east-west light rail running down the center line of the freeway, that it would necessarily have stops at Pacific or Verdugo. We think they might be logical opportunities. So just being prudent, we think we ought to look at Pacific Avenue and Verdugo Road as being kind of little transit-oriented district gateways as part of this plan. This plan would then ultimately be adopted with a kind of long-range implementation plan relative to the zoning. So we would not necessarily rezone Verdugo Road to be a transit district until we have some certainty that there would be a transit stop there. Yeah. So we're not sort of getting ahead of the infrastructure, as it were, in terms of land use development. So there would be a number of factors like this, but it also then allows the city, if this is adopted as policy, which if the council adopts it, that would be the official city policy. It allows us to then have a platform by which we can pursue those kind of funding opportunities and hopefully be able to pressure Metro to say, let's get this light rail on the freeway happening sooner than 2067 because we got a plan and we're ready to go, is sort of the thinking. So if I may, I think I've got 2 or 3 more slides just to kind of conclude where we're at process-wise. So you've seen these drawings before, so there's one for alternative 3. I will say all 3 of these alternatives also include Space 134, the freeway park, cap park proposal that's been circulating in public discourse for a number of years. So this is included as a kind of possibility in the environmental impact report, at least as a kind of concept, not necessarily figuring out all the details relative to traffic impacts that might generate. So as I said, we're looking at an environmental impact report here, and that includes the 3 alternatives I just mentioned, I just described. We have a website where you can get all the information. We've kind of posted all the staff reports, the graphics I just presented, and tons more. GlendaleCA.gov/SGCP for South Glendale Community Plan. And we've been doing a significant amount of public outreach at the direction of the City Council. So our next major event is going to be this coming Saturday. We're doing a big community event at Cerritos Park. We're calling the Halloween Spooktacle. And we've done this kind of event a couple times at Cerritos Park. So we'll have all these kind of posters and banners and information are just displayed as kind of posters and interactive displays at the park. But we're also doing some fun activities for kids. We're going to have a costume contest and some other kind of kid activities to encourage families to attend and then be able to engage this information as well as just have a fun morning activity. Also in conjunction with that is going to be, it's called Glendale Walking Tour here, but it's actually a walk audits departing from Cerritos School that are connected with the pedestrian safety initiatives and pedestrian plan. So we'll be walking some of the streets in South Glendale. And then we'll be doing a walk audit again the following Saturday on November 5th, departing from a location in basically Glen Oaks, a church at Glen Oaks and Brand, I forget the name of the church. And a number of those walking corridors will go south of the freeway into South Glendale neighborhoods as well. And then in the staff report, we've listed all the different associations and groups in town that we've been meeting with. So it includes the Chamber of Commerce, both the Glendale Chamber of Commerce, the Armenian Chamber of Commerce. We've met with the hospital, the Glendale Young Professionals. Anybody who wants us to come and talk to them, we will go to their meeting and kind of give the same presentation. It also includes met with the Adams Hill Homeowners Association or Neighborhood Association a couple of weeks ago. As I said, we'll be doing the same presentation you just saw to the Design Review Board on Thursday. We've got a couple of other meetings coming up that's scheduled. And so,
Alan, when do you expect this to return to the TPC, I guess, for the draft EIR?
Excellent question,
Yeah.
Commissioner Yakubian. So our timeline here is we're soliciting public input relative to these three alternatives and plans and the policies that are associated with them. We will be going back to City Council on November 15th with an update. So we'll be, as best we can, because this is a very dynamic process, we'll sort of probably take October 30th as our cutoff date, since that'll encapsulate the event on this coming Saturday. Summarize all the output or input we've received as best we can and present that to the City Council. So we have a survey that's part of, if you go to the website, you'll find the survey that you can participate in. And so one of the questions of the survey is, would you support a streetcar on Brand Boulevard, yes or no? So based on the responses of that, if it turns out that 80% of the people who responded to the survey said they wouldn't support a streetcar on Brand Boulevard, we would communicate that information to the City Council. So we'll be giving the City Council an update on November 15th. I will say that a big component of that in my staff report to the Council may have to be quickly revised if we wake up on November 9 and discover Measure M had failed, because then a lot of this infrastructure that I just presented might have to come out of the plan. So we'll give Council an update on November 15th as to kind of what the public input has been and kind of reaction to the kind of policies we've put forward. We'll then hunker down over the holidays and complete the technical work on the environmental impact report, including the traffic analysis and greenhouse gas analysis that comes out of that traffic report, and wrap up our draft environmental impact report. We hope to have that published along with a draft plan for all 30-odd neighborhoods of South Glendale. Have that published into January, early February, hopefully. Then we anticipate there being a 60-day, 2-month comment period on the draft plan. And during that comment period, we'd be coming back to all the same community groups I mentioned, but then fundamentally to the commissions, city commissions, and asking for your input. So somewhere in that time frame, in February, March, we'd come back to the TPC with the draft plan, with the draft environmental impact report, which include the sort of traffic analysis, and asking you to make a recommendation or comment on that information in February, March. Ultimately, your comments, the Parks Commission's comments, the Design Review Board comments, the Historic Commission's comments would actually be filtered to the Planning Commission. Planning Commission of all the commissions would have the last input. They are actually required by state law to provide a recommendation to the City Council on any general plan policies. So We'll go to all the commissions in February, March, ending with Planning Commission. Planning Commission then will hear, when they take on the question, they would have the benefit of this commission's recommendations and thoughts, as well as the other commissions I mentioned. Planning Commission will then have an opportunity to make their recommendations, and then we'll go back to the office and for 1 month or 2 months, depending on the nature of the comments, revise the draft EIR and the draft plan into a final plan and final EIR that then would be presented again to the Planning Commission for their formal recommendation to the City Council and then ultimately to the City Council. So we're hoping we could be in front of the Planning Commission for their final review, say June, and then City Council in July. So as I said, City Council, when they adopt the plan, they would be adopting the overall policy structure, probably not adopting a lot of the implementing zoning that night. Hopefully the Tropico zoning would come that night. That might be all that is adopted that evening in conjunction with the plan. The rest of the zoning to implement that plan would be part of an implementation strategy that we would outline to the council that within 3 months of the plan being adopted, we would try and get this in front of them. Small lot subdivisions is, I think, the first order of business. And then, within 2 years, we'd get on to this other topic. We'd resolve the issue of what does the affordable housing overlay zone actually look like within a 1 to 2 year period. But we wouldn't necessarily rezone or revisit or kind of rethink East Colorado until Metro commits to building that bus rapid transit corridor on East Colorado. So we're not putting into zoning in advance of the transit infrastructure. So we think it's probably about a 5-year implementation plan of various zoning actions and other things that would come.
Can we go back to the map? And if you recall, when you were here last time or the time prior to that, we discussed driving routes from east to west, north to south, which thoroughfares to make it the arterial thoroughfares where people can move from east to west and north to south. And we're talking about maybe we make some of those streets one way. They're one of the options. Maybe how is that going to affect into this plan? Is that whatever we discussed? Was it part of your proposal here? The streets, the street traffic?
If I recall, what we've looked at in the past has been some east-west one-way couplets.
Yes.
I believe it was some combination of Wilson, California, and or Lexington.
Yes.
Is what we've looked at in 2006 when we did the downtown specific plan.
And perhaps one of the streets from north to south, or making one of the streets make it one way north, one way south.
At the time, we looked at a one-way couplet. The only pairing that probably makes a certain amount of sense would be Brand and Central. And it's almost impossible to imagine that the businesses on Brand or Central, particularly on Brand, would tolerate Brand being a one-way street, just because we'd lose so much potential traffic, drive-by traffic and access to the freeways. So if you sort of say those two streets aren't really possible, you then end up sort of moving out to Columbus, maybe Louise. Neither one of those streets provides direct access to the 134 freeway, so maybe they don't make so much sense. And then you start looking at I think it's Pacific and maybe even like Glendale Avenue. At that point, you're so far away from the downtown that the one-way couplet really doesn't have a logical sense. And this is what we looked at in 2006 relative to the downtown specific plan. And at the time, we ran those scenarios through the city's traffic model with the projections we imagined the downtown specific plan to deliver. And what we found is that there was very little kind of traffic congestion relief from doing that particular one-way, any of those one-way couplets. So there's significant costs associated with those kinds of changes, re-signalizing everything, reconfiguring driveways, et cetera. So in 2006, those alternatives were looked at, and they didn't go any further than that. What's probably still on the table in terms of one-way street combos is relative to Space 134, the freeway park, looking at somehow in conjunction with that work, introducing a full-on one-way frontage roads on either side of the freeway.
Sanchez and Good?
Yeah, sort of extending Sanchez and Good, and ideally extending it all the way to somehow connect with the Glendale Avenue on-ramps. We quite haven't, to be honest, we quite haven't figured out exactly how you do that, because once you get to Glendale Avenue, the amount of space you have to work with gets very constrained. But as part of the Space 134 analysis, and our next phase on that is to look at some of the freeway improvements we could include as part of that project. That's still on the table there. And the last discussion we had with the City Council on this topic, that was kind of where we left it with them, was that we had committed to looking at that one-way scenario.
That is not tied into this EIR.
No, not at this time. No, what is tied into, however, which is pretty significant, is these new transit stops. So in terms of mitigations of potential traffic generated by development, alternative 3 includes this new transit infrastructure, which should be pretty significant in terms of reducing vehicle traffic on city streets.
Anybody has questions?
No, I've asked a lot of questions. I appreciate the comprehensive report.
Thank you, Alan.
There's one thing that I suggest is anything like this, any future developments, should come before all the boards, not just going to council like the other developments which just happened a few years ago. I guess if every board puts their input, would probably be much better than going to council and for one vote and one approval. Individual, let's say, ordinance per se, or a development.
Yeah, that would actually require a change of the city's zoning code. In terms of our approval process is dictated by the city zoning code, so that would have to be initiated by the city council.
For example, if these developments that took place had come before different boards, would have come, I'm sure would have gotten different product. At least anyone on this board, even prior boards, would have questioned some of the developments or asked for some kind of dedication to allow more maneuvering on the streets of Glendale.
Yeah, I mean, I will say is, again, the approval process of development in the city is outlined by the city zoning code. So right now in the downtown specific plan, that approving authority is consolidated with the city council. Changing that would require the city council to request making a change to the zoning code. So we're, as staff, not empowered to actually bring stuff to you, to any of the commissions.
Maybe you should make it part of your recommendation to ask them for approval of if it's, in fact, there's a major development. And we'll have to define what the major development is, or major ordinance change. Or,
I think that would be hard coming from the staff. I think it had to come from the commission. It would seem like to me.
Yeah, I wouldn't be in a position to recommend that.
I don't think staff could make a recommendation to suggest that zoning format be changed because of the way it's struck. I think it'd have to come from commissioners.
Yeah, I mean, in the city council and then in the past, for a number of years, projects in the San Fernando Road were also reviewed and approved by the city council. And about a year ago, the city council themselves said, we don't want to be looking at these projects. We're going to delegate that authority back down to the city's design review board. And the city's design review board is the final approving authority. And if there are variances, et cetera, associated with projects or conditional use permits, that's heard by a hearing officer, planning hearing officer. That's how that process goes. But in the end, the city's design review board is the final approving authority for every project outside of the downtown, with their decisions being appealable to the city council. And we've seen that recently with a number of projects being design review board approved that have then been appealed to the city council. So, but right now, every project in the downtown gets approved by the city council, except for very small ones where staff has the authority to approve storefront renovations, for example.
When was that zoning ordinance change? What year do you know about? Because it used to go through the Planning Commission and others, right?
Right. Part of adopting the downtown specific plan and then a series of streamlining actions that took place to incentivize development during the Great Recession was when the ordinance to consolidate all review to the City Council was adopted. So I'm going to say that's 2007, 2008. 2007,
right, yeah.
Yeah, and then there was a certain kind of logic to it in that if the city council is functioning as a design review authority and there is a variance or conditional use permit that has a design impact, it made sense to have a kind of consolidated review as opposed to the planning commission approving that variance and then the city council higher authority than the Planning Commission than being stuck with a decision the Planning Commission made. It's kind of awkward.
I think it's fair to say that that wouldn't happen in other certain neighboring cities. It's a
No
non-political statement.
Thank you very much.
So in any event, that's the status. We're not recommending any particular changes to approval process as part of this, although, I think one place where this affordable housing overlay zone may end up playing out is we may have to address that, and that's in large measure because the state continues to push new legislation that requires us to approve anything with an affordable housing project with sometimes very limited public review or discretionary review by our city's commissions or design review boards. So a big part, I think, of this affordable housing overlay zone is going to be trying to get in front of state legislation on that as it comes to approving projects. So trying to anticipate what the state might ask us to do.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Loomis.
Thank you
So much.
Thank you for your comments. We'll take them
Please
under
don't go have a
advisement.
question. Okay, thank you. Item number 6.
Item 6 is commission staff comments and updates.
I had a question, but it was already answered by Alan relative to Rubik's email and relative to the process that the committee made a recommendation to the board. So, and I reiterate thank the staff for getting the negotiation going to where it's at now, and hopefully that Measure M will pass in the next couple of weeks.
Commissioner Yakutka, any questions?
Well, I'll defer to staff first, and then I'll make my comments.
Right, Chairperson Kirkjian, we have no staff comments. Nothing from Rubik as well.
Okay.
Great.
I have some comments. It's wonderful to be following Alan's presentation, and I wish people who viewing, it's a pretty light crowd today in chambers, to say mildly, but to the viewing public, if you're trying to get to CNN or Fox tonight, please stop on Channel 6. And this is truly an exciting time to be living in the city of Glendale. What Alan presented tonight. What Alan presented tonight just shows you all the amazing things that are, possible with this city. And kind of piggybacking on that, I wanted to speak briefly as a member of the Pedestrian Safety Advisory Committee. And I wanted to take the opportunity to tell the public that there is some very, very exciting things that are about to happen in the city of Glendale in relation to pedestrian safety. And this is a safety education initiative it's a monumental effort that's going to try to influence behavior so that we can make Glendale a safer place to walk, bike, and drive. This is an initiative that's going to be funded $500,000 that's coming from Caltrans Cycle One Active Transportation Program, and we're trying to get drivers, bicyclists, pedestrians to start taking personal responsibility to start sharing the roads in Glendale. And the first phase of this initiative, as true to form to our great staff in Glendale, working with the consultants, working and digging into the data that we have and learning a great deal about that. A lot of it also is reaching out to the people of Glendale to understand how they feel about pedestrian safety. I mean, what a city that we live in. I want to say that, we're making such a connection with the residents. The city conducted a pedestrian survey in English, Spanish, and Armenian to try to find out what the big sticking points were with the residents. They had over 650 responses. And, again, the city went into a police department and state sources to pull out all the data. They talked to community organizations. I mean, that's what's been going on in these past few months now. It's been underway for some time. Oftentimes with Glendale, all the amazing things kind of happen behind the scenes, including a shout out to the Glendale staff that gets that $500,000 grant money, which is becoming so amazing. I don't want people to take for granted all the hard work that goes into that. But with that said, they've talked to the residents, and what we're finding is, and I just want to briefly let people know what's been pulled out so far, because I think it's very important for people to know what are the major findings that the city is beginning to understand. 94% of the people who took the survey agreed or strongly agreed that pedestrian safety is a big problem with Glendale, with bad driver behavior and unsafe intersection as the top two reasons that they do not walk or ride a bike more often. The majority of the people involved in collisions are often the most vulnerable, which are the elderly and the young citizens. And surprisingly, I know we as citizens of Glendale like to bash our city, and sometimes rightfully so on some issues, but 50% of the collisions are a result of Glendale drivers, and 50% are actually out-of-city drivers. So we have bad drivers in other cities as well that are coming into ours. So we have a big big effort that's going to be going underway, not just to reach out to us in Glendale, but also to drivers who are coming into our city. This is an exciting time because they're going to be launching Be Street Smart Glendale. And it is going to kick off November 1st in the City Hall Plaza. So I want, again, if you're skimming the channels right now, stop on 6. Stick with 6 is going to be my motto, because you're going to be noticing in the city of Glendale a whole lot of new things that are going to be popping out. A lot of interesting things that you're going to see. One of the things you might see already are the billboards. If you want to put up the billboard sign, this is now, it's gone up in the city, and we've seen them at Broadway in Belmont, Central in San Fernando, Colorado and Brand, Colorado and Fisher, Colorado and Kenwood, Glendale and Doran, Glendale and Madison Way, San Fernando and Goodwin. We are reaching out throughout the city to start getting out the message that we are different stakeholders and we have to share one road. So that's a wonderful billboard that's up. Another thing, starting November 1st, go online, BeStreetSmartGlendale.com. There's a billion-step challenge, and that is quite a goal to get 1 billion steps, and we're going to get the Glendale residents out and walking for sure. Besides other things that are going on are the educational materials that we're going to see passing around, that you're going to be able to see the crossing of the street. Here we go. We have the first picture, start walking, the middle picture, which, people often think I can just run across the street now. I can make it in 25 seconds, but actually that means don't leave the curb, don't start walking across the crosswalk, and of course the don't walk sign. So this is to educate the public in that way. We need the assistance of the residents of Glendale. And I'm going to look, is that the camera? Right in the camera. This is the time for anyone out there who feels that they have input, that they have criticisms, that they want to see improvements, that they have suggestions. There's a unique opportunity for you to actually walk with the experts. And there may be some police officers out there walking with you, but experts in the field of engineering as well, to be able to walk the streets, a little portion of the streets of Glendale, and find things and comment and say, wow, look at the cracks in the sidewalk, or wow, this is not, I don't have enough time to cross the street. You're going to be able to make observations, and this is the time where you will really be listened to. So if you're opinionated and you're concerned about pedestrian safety, about bicycling and the safety for bicyclists, this is your time to come out and speak. So we're going to put up the Glendale walkabout, and this is what Alan was referring to. That's coming up, I think, October 29th at Cerritos Elementary School Auditorium from 9 to 12:30. Please come out. And also November 5th, again, 9 to 12:30 at the Incarnation Community Center. Crucial for you to be out there. We need your input. The city is reaching out to you, the citizens, to please come and give your input. It's a very important, very valuable. This is the, give me that one moment in time song. This is it. This is the one moment in time where all the forces are coming together, funding, great involvement with staff, with consultants. The last component of this is going to be the public, you. Come out, say what you have to say, give your input, and we truly believe it's going to take all of us together to make this city a better city, to walk and ride our bikes in and drive in. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Commissioner Yakubian, I applaud all the work and all the enthusiasm and passion that you brought to us and the viewing audience, and I believe this pedestrian safety is led by Mr. Loomis, if I'm correct. And I want to thank you as well in leading the efforts of what you just described.
The majority of the credit needs to go to the staff that works with me, so I just cheer them on.
Now, your presentation made me to remind me of another issue, which will be coming to us shortly, whether we like it or not. That's from a neighboring city. There's the world's or United States' largest IKEA being built in Burbank, and I believe we're going to get a lot of traffic and a lot of out-of-area traffic going through Glendale as a result of IKEA, the way I see it. Now, I was looking at a bigger picture during the presentation. That's what I was thinking as you were talking. Do we have any backup plan before we flood our streets? And she just made a good point, Commissioner Yakubian, about out-of-area drivers. If 50% of accidents are done by out-of-area drivers, we're going to have a lot more out-of-area drivers if that IKEA opens up. All the people coming from south, they will come through on Golden State Freeway. They have to exit either Western or Alameda. And Alameda and Western, they basically carry the same traffic. My office is in between Alameda and Western. And when I go home taking Western, the traffic almost half as much. It takes me much longer to go on Alameda because of all the traffic that is there without IKEA. However, do we have any plans?
Chairperson Kirkjian, members of the commission, that's an excellent point. The new footprint for the IKEA building is definitely closer to the border of Glendale than the old site. So that's something that staff will definitely look into and will report back to the commission.
Okay. In other words, we don't have any backup plans yet or anything that works.
I don't have any information on that on me right now, but that's a good point, and I think that's something we can report back to the commission regarding.
Okay, I think that's something we need to address, and the viewing public needs to know because they're ready to open in March 2017. That's before you plan something, they're open.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Also, there are a couple of things which there are a couple of left turns which I want to propose. If I suggest the staff to study it, if it's warranted, perhaps putting those left turn signs. One of them is when you're going west on Little Glen Oaks and making a left turn into South Pacific. Can put a no left over there. That's creating traffic for drivers going north on Pacific and crossing Glen Oaks. And that, I believe, creating undue traffic and bottleneck sort of on Pacific. And also, people who are leaving the new Trader Joe's and making a left turn on Glen Oaks going east. That's also creating traffic. Maybe we can put another left turn over there. Perhaps time it during maybe no left turn during rush hours. I think those are warranted if the staff recommends. Maybe it needs to be looked at as well.
Yes, sir. I'll have Wayne Coe and his staff look at both locations. Yes.
Great. Thank you. Anything else?
I have one other question, please. Just relative to calendar. I think my calendar shows our next meeting is December 26th. I take it that's not going to happen? Or if it is, what is the plan?
That is a city holiday, so the city will be closed on December 26th. For a December meeting, we will have to see if we could have a special meeting in the beginning of the month.
Okay. And then the next one in the new year would be what month?
It would have to fall in February.
Okay, that'd be the last.
Last week of the.
Thank you. Of February.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Motion to adjourn?
So move.
Okay. We're adjourned. Thank you. And
Thanks, Alan.
Thank you, Alan.